Hi, I'm Sophie Bennett, and 6 months ago, my own parents forced me to work as a maid at their high society charity gala. They handed me a uniform, told me to stay invisible, and made me serve drinks to people who'd known me my entire life. My brother laughed behind his champagne glass while my mother warned me not to embarrass the family. Just like that, I was reduced from daughter to servant in my own home. But here's the twist. They thought they were teaching me humility. They thought they were putting me in my place. Instead, I met someone who would change everything. The foundation president recognized me from my volunteer work my parents never knew about. Now I'm standing in front of them again, but this time, I'm not holding a serving tray. I'm holding the future they never imagined for me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandeliers cast an ethereal glow across the marble floors of our family estate. Outside, a line of luxury cars snaked down the driveway, delivering Sacramento's elite to my parents' annual charity gala. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the black uniform laid out on my bed, a stark contrast to the designer gown I'd worn to last year's event. "You can't be serious," I said, as my mother, Victoria, swept into the room, already dressed in a shimmering silver evening gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Perfectly serious," she replied, not even looking up from adjusting her diamond earrings. "The catering staff is short-handed, and this will be good for you." I turned to face her. "Good for me? To serve drinks to your friends? People who've known me since I was a child?" Victoria finally met my gaze, her steel blue eyes narrowing slightly. "Sophie, after that stunt you pulled last month, you mean applying to art school instead of law school?" I cut in. "You need to understand that actions have consequences," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "This family has a reputation to maintain. The Bennett name means something in this city." My father, Richard, appeared in the doorway, impeccable in his tailored tuxedo. "Is there a problem?" His voice carried that familiar tone, the one that didn't actually ask a question but demanded compliance. "No problem," Victoria answered before I could speak. Sophie was just about to get changed. Richard nodded, his expression softening just slightly. For a moment, I thought he might intervene, might remember that I was his daughter, not the help. Instead, he checked his platinum watch. "The first guests arrive in 30 minutes. The catering manager will be up to brief you." And just like that, they were gone, leaving me alone with the uniform and the crushing weight of their disappointment. I slipped into the black pants and white button-up shirt, my fingers trembling with a mixture of humiliation and rage. This wasn't about the catering staff being short-handed. This was punishment. This was my parents' way of reminding me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see my older brother, Ethan, leaning against the doorframe, already nursing his first whiskey of the evening. "Wow, sis," he smirked, taking a slow sip. "The uniform actually suits you." I ignored him, focusing on tying my hair back into a tight, professional bun. "Mom and Dad are really laying it on thick this time," he continued, entering my room. Uninvited. "But honestly, what did you expect? Art school?" He chuckled, the sound grating against my nerves. "The Bennetts don't do creative careers. We do law, medicine, business. You know, things that actually matter." I spun around, unable to contain my frustration any longer. "Just because you fell in line doesn't mean I have to." Ethan's smirk faltered, his eyes hardening. "No, you don't have to. But don't be surprised when they cut you off. You think Mom and Dad are going to fund some pipe dream? They're giving you a taste of reality tonight." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Better get used to serving drinks." After he left, I stood in front of my mirror, barely recognizing myself. The person staring back at me wasn't Sophie Bennett, honor student and hopeful artist. She was anonymous, invisible, exactly what my parents wanted me to be tonight. The catering manager, a harried woman named Martha, appeared a few minutes later, giving me a quick rundown of my duties. Stick to the north wing, serve champagne, collect empty glasses, and stay out of the way, she instructed, handing me a serving tray. And for heaven's sake, try to smile. Mrs. Bennett was very specific about the staff appearing pleasant. Of course she was. The gala was already in full swing when I descended the grand staircase, tray in hand. The house had been transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Ice sculptures shaped like swans adorned the buffet tables, while string quartet music wafted through the air, occasionally punctuated by the tinkling of crystal glasses and practiced laughter. I kept my head down as I circulated through the crowd, offering champagne with a practiced, "Would you care for a drink?" Most guests took the glasses without even looking at me, the invisible service worker doing her job. A few did double takes, clearly recognizing me, but quickly averting their eyes in embarrassment or confusion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. From across the room, I caught sight of my mother charming a group of potential donors. Her laugh just a touch too melodious to be genuine. Beside her, my father engaged in serious conversation with the mayor, no doubt discussing his upcoming campaign contributions. They moved through the space like royalty, completely in their element. And then there was Ethan, surrounded by a circle of admirers, regaling them with stories from his first year at Harvard Law. He caught my eye as I passed and raised his empty glass, signaling for a refill with a smug smile. I gritted my teeth and approached, swapping his empty glass for a full one. "Thank you," he said loudly, then dropped his voice to a whisper only I could hear. "Not quite the grand entrance you imagined for the gala, is it, sis?" I forced a smile, acutely aware of my mother's warning to appear pleasant. "Enjoy your drink, sir." 2 hours into the evening, my feet were aching, my smile was frozen in place, and I'd endured countless pitying glances from my parents' acquaintances. I'd just finished collecting a round of empty glasses when I felt a firm tap on my shoulder. "Excuse me," said a crisp, authoritative voice. I turned to find myself face to face with Eleanor Winters, the president of the Reed Foundation, one of the most influential philanthropic organizations in Northern California. In her early 60s, with a crown of silver hair and penetrating hazel eyes, she exuded an aura of quiet power that made even my parents defer to her. "Yes, ma'am. Would you like a fresh drink?" I asked, slipping into my server role. Eleanor tilted her head, studying me with a curious expression. "You're Sophie Bennett, aren't you?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This was exactly what my parents had feared. Someone of importance recognizing me in my humiliating position. "Yes, ma'am," I admitted, heat rising to my cheeks. But instead of the awkward pity I'd come to expect, Eleanor's eyes lit up with recognition of a different sort. "I thought so. You volunteer at the East Side Community Center, don't you? The art program for underprivileged children?" I stared at her, momentarily speechless. For over a year, I'd been volunteering my Saturdays, teaching art to kids in Sacramento's poorest neighborhood, something I'd kept hidden from my status-obsessed parents. How did Eleanor Winters know about that? Yes, I do," I finally managed. Eleanor smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her formidable face. "I visited the center last month. The director showed me some of the murals you helped the children create." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Remarkable work. You have quite a talent for connecting with those kids." Before I could respond, I felt a presence beside me. My mother had materialized, her smile dazzling but her eyes sharp with warning. "Eleanor, I see you've met our Sophie," Victoria said, placing a possessive hand on my shoulder. "She's helping out tonight. Such a giving heart, always wanting to contribute." Eleanor's gaze shifted between us, missing nothing. Indeed, we were just discussing Sophie's volunteer work at the Eastside Community Center. The art program there has shown remarkable results in engagement and academic improvement among the children. My mother's hand tightened painfully on my shoulder. "Is that so? How lovely." Her voice remained pleasant, but I could feel the tension radiating through her fingers. "Sophie, I believe Martha needs help in the kitchen. Eleanor, would you join me? The senator was just asking about your latest initiative." I was being dismissed, shuffled away before Eleanor could say anything more. But as my mother attempted to guide her away, Eleanor stood her ground. "Actually, Victoria, I'd love to continue my conversation with Sophie. Perhaps she could take a short break? I'm quite interested in her perspective on community-based arts education." For a moment, my mother froze, caught between social decorum and her desire to separate me from this influential woman. "Of course," she finally said, her smile now brittle. "Just a short one, dear. We wouldn't want to leave the other guests unattended." As my mother retreated, Eleanor turned back to me. "Is there somewhere we might speak privately for a moment?" I led her to the small library off the main hall, a room blessedly empty of gala attendees. Once the door closed behind us, muffling the sounds of the party, Eleanor fixed me with a direct gaze. "Sophie, I'm going to be frank with you. Your work at the center caught my attention. The program director showed me your portfolio as well, your personal work, not just the children's projects." My breath caught. My portfolio was my most treasured possession, filled with pieces I'd created over years of self-teaching and online courses, the art that my parents dismissed as a hobby at best and a waste of time at worst. "You have genuine talent," Eleanor continued. "Raw in some aspects, certainly, but with tremendous potential. The Reed Foundation has recently established a scholarship program for emerging artists with a focus on community engagement. Full tuition at the California Institute of the Arts, plus a stipend for living expenses." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I don't understand." Eleanor smiled again. "I'm not offering you the scholarship outright. There's an application process, interviews, a review board. But I am strongly encouraging you to apply. The deadline is next Friday." She reached into her clutch and extracted a business card. "Email me directly, and I'll send you the details." I took the card with trembling fingers, struggling to process what was happening. "My parents don't support my interest in art," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "They want me to study law." Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. "Parents often believe they know what's best for their children. Sometimes they're right." She glanced meaningfully at my server's uniform. "And sometimes they need to recognize when they're standing in the way of something exceptional." The library door opened abruptly, and my father stepped in, his expression carefully neutral. "Eleanor, I apologize for the interruption, but Senator Hayes is quite eager to discuss the downtown revitalization project with you." "Of course, Richard," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Sophie and I were just finishing our conversation." She turned back to me, her voice carrying a note of finality. "Think about what I said. Next Friday." As she swept past my father, she paused briefly. "You have a remarkable daughter, Richard. Perhaps not in the ways you've been measuring." Left. Alone with my father, I quickly tucked Eleanor's card into my pocket, bracing myself for the inevitable questions or reprimand. But Richard Bennett surprised me. "What did she want?" he asked, his voice more curious than accusatory. For a split second, I considered telling him the truth about my volunteering, about the scholarship opportunity that could change everything. But the memory of his dismissive laugh when I'd first mentioned art school stopped me. "Just making conversation," I replied evenly. She recognized me. My father nodded slowly, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Eleanor, Winters doesn't just make conversation, Sophie. She's the most deliberate person I know." He straightened his already perfect tie. "Whatever she said to you, consider it carefully. Her good opinion is worth more than most." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Your break is over. Back to work." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I moved through the crowd mechanically, serving drinks and collecting glasses while my mind raced with possibilities. The weight of Eleanor's business card in my pocket felt like both an anchor and a lifeline. As the gala wound down and the last guest departed, I helped the catering staff clear glasses and plates, ignoring the curious glances from the actual hired help who clearly wondered why the daughter of the house was working alongside them. I was wrapping leftover silverware when Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, her perfect posture somehow still intact despite the late hour. "That's enough," she said coolly. "The staff can finish up. I need to speak with you." I followed, her to my father's study, where both he and Ethan were waiting. Richard stood behind his massive oak desk, while Ethan lounged in a leather armchair, tie loosened, looking bored. "Close the door," my mother instructed. I did as I was told, then stood before them, still in my server's uniform, feeling like a defendant before a tribunal. "What exactly did you say to Eleanor Winters?" Victoria demanded without preamble. "Nothing," I replied. She recognized me and started the conversation. "From where?" my father asked, his voice calmer than my mother's. "Where would Eleanor Winters know you from?" I hesitated, weighing my options. The truth would come out eventually. It already had, in some ways. But standing there, outnumbered and exhausted, I wasn't ready for the full confrontation. "School events, I assume," I lied. "She attends the charity functions at Westmont Prep." My mother's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Eleanor specifically mentioned the Eastside Community Center. Something about an art program?" So this was it. The moment my secret life collided with the one my parents had scripted for me. "I volunteer there on Saturdays," I admitted, "teaching art to kids." "The East Side?" Ethan scoffed. "That's practically the ghetto. What would possess you to go there?" I ignored him, keeping my focus on my parents. "I've been doing it for over a year." Victoria looked genuinely shocked. "Without telling us? In that neighborhood? Do you have any idea how dangerous?" "It's not dangerous," I cut in. "It's just not filled with people who summer in the Hamptons." "Don't be flippant," my father warned. "This isn't about class distinctions. It's about your safety and this family's reputation." "My safety has never been at risk," I replied, frustration building in my chest. And as for the family reputation, wasn't that what tonight was about? Making me understand my place in the eye. Great Bennett legacy? Victoria stepped forward, her composure slipping. "We put you to work tonight because you need to learn respect, responsibility, structure. These are the values that built this family, that will secure your future." "No," I said, the word falling like a stone between us. "You did it to humiliate me. To punish me for wanting something different than what you've planned." The room fell silent. Even Ethan straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from boredom to surprise at my defiance. Richard moved from behind his desk, his face solemn. "What did Eleanor say to you in the library? The truth this time." I met his gaze steadily. "She told me about a scholarship program for art school. Full tuition plus expenses." Victoria made a small, dismissive sound. "Absolutely not. We've discussed this, Sophie. You're attending Stanford Law just like your brother, just like I did." just like 3 generations of Bennetts before you." "What else did she say?" my father pressed, ignoring my mother's interjection. "She encouraged me to apply. The deadline is next Friday." Richard nodded slowly, processing this information. Then he turned to my mother. "Victoria, Ethan, I'd like to speak with Sophie alone." My mother looked like she might object, but something in my father's expression stopped her. With a tight nod, she left the study, Ethan trailing behind her with a curious backward glance. When the door closed, my father sighed heavily and gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit down, Sophie." I perched on the edge of the seat, wary of what might come next. Richard Bennett didn't sit. Instead, he moved to the window, looking out at the darkened garden where just hours before, Sacramento's elite had mingled among strategically placed torches and flower arrangements. "Eleanor." "Winters doesn't offer opportunities lightly," he said finally. "If she's taken an interest in you, there's a reason." I remained silent, afraid to hope, afraid to believe my father might actually be considering this. He turned back to me. "Show me." "Show you what?" "Your art, this talent that caught Eleanor's attention." My heart raced. In all my years of drawing, painting, creating, my father had never once asked to see my work. Now? Now. I led him to my bedroom, where I retrieved my portfolio from its hiding place in the back of my closet. With trembling hands, I unzipped the case and spread the contents across my bed. Sketches, watercolors, small acrylic canvases, digital prints. Years of work that represented more of my true self than anything my parents had ever bothered to. "See?" My father studied each piece methodically, his expression unreadable. He lingered over a portrait series I'd done of the children at the community center, their faces captured in moments of concentration and joy. "You did these?" he asked, his voice carrying a note I'd never heard before. Uncertainty. "Yes." He picked up a sketch of an elderly man, his face mapped with wrinkles, eyes bright with wisdom and humor. "Who is this?" "Mr. Garcia. He runs the bodega near the community center. He gives the kids free fruit when they show him their schoolwork." My father nodded, setting the sketch down carefully. He continued through the portfolio in silence, examining each piece with the same attention he gave to legal briefs and investment reports. Finally, he looked up at me. "You've been hiding this, all of this." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Would you have cared? Would it have mattered? For the first time in my memory, Richard Bennett looked genuinely taken aback. "I don't know," he admitted. "I never considered. This wasn't the path we envisioned for you." "It's the path I want," I said simply. He was quiet for a long moment, then carefully began returning the artwork to my portfolio. "Your mother won't support this. Not easily. Not at first." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "And you?" My father zipped the portfolio closed and handed it back to me. "I'm not sure yet. But I know enough about Eleanor Winters to understand that if she sees something in you, it would be foolish to ignore it." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Apply for the scholarship, Sophie. We'll discuss what happens next if you get it." It wasn't approval. It wasn't even close to the support I desperately wanted. But it was a crack in the foundation of opposition that had defined my relationship with my parents for years. After he left, I sat on my bed, still in my server's uniform, clutching my portfolio to my chest. The events of the evening washed over me. The humiliation, the unexpected encounter with Eleanor, my father's unexpected reaction to my art. Something had shifted tonight, though I couldn't yet tell how significantly or in what direction. I pulled Eleanor's business card from my pocket, running my fingers over the embossed lettering. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future of my own design. One where I wasn't just a continuation of the Bennett legacy, but the creator of something new and entirely my own. I reached for my phone and opened my email. By morning, Victoria would surely have regrouped, ready to crush this rebellion with the full force of her influence and determination. Ethan would fall in line with whatever position benefited him most. My father's momentary openness might evaporate in the cold light of day, but right now, in this moment, I had a choice. A chance. I began typing an email to Eleanor Winters. 2 days later, I sat at our formal dining table, pushing food around my plate while an uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Since the night of the gala, my mother had veered between icy silence and pointed lectures about family responsibility. Ethan watched the drama unfold with detached amusement, occasionally throwing in a comment designed to provoke both sides. My father, surprisingly, had said little, observing the tension with thoughtful eyes. "I've scheduled a tour of Stanford's campus next weekend," Victoria announced, cutting her chicken with precise movements. "The dean of admissions is an old classmate of mine. He's agreed to meet with you personally, Sophie." I set down my fork. "I can't next weekend. I have commitments at the community center." My mother's knife scraped against the china with a sound that made me wince. "Those commitments are over. I've already called the center director and explained that you won't be continuing your volunteer work." The blood drained from my face. "You did what?" "It's for the best, Sophie," she said, her tone softening to what she probably thought was reasonable. "You need to focus on your future now. College applications, LSAT prep. These are your priorities." "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. "Those kids are counting on me." Victoria sighed as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "They'll find another volunteer. That's not your concern anymore." "Actually," my father interjected, surprising us all, "I spoke with the center director this morning. Sophie's program will continue." My mother's head snapped toward him. "You did what?" Richard calmly took a sip of his wine before responding. "I called to apologize for your overreach, Victoria, and to make a donation to support the art program." The room fell silent. Ethan let out a low whistle, clearly enjoying the unexpected conflict. "You undermined me," my mother said, her voice deadly quiet. "I corrected a mistake," my father replied. "Sophie's volunteer work is valuable, to the community and to her. It stays on her schedule." I stared at my father, trying to reconcile this defense with the man who had stood silently by while my mother forced me to work as a server at our own gala. Victoria's face hardened. "This is about that scholarship, isn't it? You're actually considering letting her throw away her future on some artistic pipe dream." "I'm considering letting her explore an opportunity that came directly from one of the most influential women in Northern California," my father countered. "An opportunity that recognizes talent we apparently failed to see." My mother turned. To me, her expression a mixture of frustration and genuine concern. "Sophie, please. Art is a lovely hobby, but it's not a career, not a stable one, not the kind of life we want for you." "It's not your life," I said quietly. "It's mine." Victoria's face flushed. "While you live under this roof, while we pay for your education, your decisions affect this family. The Bennett name—" "Is that what this is really about?" I interrupted. "The precious Bennett name? Or is it that you can't stand the thought of me making choices you didn't pre-approve?" "That's enough," my father said, his voice firm but not harsh. "Both of you." He turned to my mother. "Victoria, Sophie has applied for the Reed Foundation scholarship. If she receives it, we will discuss next steps as a family. Until then, she will continue her volunteer work and her school studies." My mother stood abruptly, tossing her napkin onto the table. "This conversation isn't over, Richard." She left the dining room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Ethan smirked at me across the table. "Way to go, sis. I haven't seen Mom that mad since I crashed the Porsche senior year." He pushed back his chair. "This should be fun to watch." After he left, I was alone with my father. "Thank you," I said hesitantly. For the community center, and for not shutting this down immediately. Richard studied me for a long moment. I'm not promising anything, Sophie, but I am listening. That's more than I've done in a while, it seems. It wasn't a declaration of support. It wasn't permission to forge my own path. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the foundation of the life my parents had built around me without my input or consent. For now, that would have to be enough. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo. I continued my classes at Westmont Prep, my Saturday sessions at the community center, and my work on the Reed Foundation scholarship application. At home, an uneasy truce had formed. My mother had pulled back on her direct opposition, instead employing a more subtle campaign of leaving Stanford brochures on my bed and arranging casual dinners with successful attorney friends who could extol the virtues of a legal career. The scholarship application was the most challenging project I'd ever undertaken. Beyond submitting my portfolio, I had to write essays about my artistic vision, my community engagement philosophy, and how I would use the opportunity to create positive change. I spent countless hours revising, refining, pouring my heart onto the page in ways I'd previously only done through visual art. The night before the deadline, I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, surrounded by drafts, sketches, and notes. A soft knock on my door pulled me from my concentration. "Come in," I called, expecting our housekeeper with an evening tea service, my mother's passive-aggressive way of checking on my progress with the Stanford applications she still believed I was completing. Instead, my father entered, looking slightly uncomfortable in the chaos of my creative process. "How's it coming?" he asked, carefully stepping around a stack of portfolio pieces. "Almost done," I replied, surprised by his interest. "Just finalizing the community impact statement." He nodded, then held out a large envelope. "This came for you today, hand-delivered." I took it, noting the Reed Foundation logo embossed in the corner. My heart raced as I broke the seal and pulled out a formal letter. "Dear Ms. Bennett," I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "The Reed Foundation is pleased to invite you to interview for our Emerging Artists Scholarship Program. Your application has advanced to the final round of consideration." I looked up at my father, unable to contain my excitement. I made it to the finals. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, maybe years, Richard Bennett smiled at me with something like pride. "Congratulations, Sophie." "There's more," I continued, scanning the letter. "The interview is next Tuesday at the Foundation headquarters. They want to see more of my work, especially pieces that demonstrate community engagement and social awareness." My father nodded thoughtfully. "What will you show them?" I hesitated, then decided to take a risk. I was thinking of the perspectives project, the collaborative murals I've been working on with the kids at the center. But they're large, installed on the center walls. I can't exactly bring them to the interview. Photos? I have some, but they don't capture the scale or impact. I bit my lip, considering. What would really help is if the interview committee could see them in person, at the center. My father was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Is that allowed? To change the interview location?" "Probably not," I admitted, "but it would make all the difference." To my surprise, he reached for my phone. "Call Eleanor, right now." "What?" "Dad, I can't just—" "Sophie," he interrupted, "if there's one thing I've learned in business, it's that bold moves sometimes yield exceptional results. The worst she can say is no." With trembling fingers, I dialed Eleanor's direct number, from her business card. To my shock, she answered on the second ring. "Eleanor Winters." "Ms. Winters, this is Sophie Bennett. I apologize for calling so late, but I just received my finalist notification, and I had a rather unorthodox request about the interview." As I explained my idea, my father watched with an expression I'd never seen before, something like, Respect mingled with curiosity. When I hung up a few minutes later, I couldn't contain my grin. She's going to bring the entire committee to the center on Tuesday. They'll interview me there and see the murals in context. My father nodded, impressed. Bold move. I learned from the best, I replied, surprising myself with the genuine compliment. Richard looked momentarily taken aback, then thoughtful. Your mother doesn't know about the finalist notification yet. No, I agreed, my excitement dimming slightly. She'll try to stop this. Probably, he conceded. Then, more decisively, I'll handle Victoria. You focus on preparing for Tuesday. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Dad, why are you helping me with this? I thought you wanted me to follow the Bennett tradition as much as Mom does. He paused at the door. I want you to be exceptional, Sophie. For a long time, I believed there was only one path to that outcome. He shrugged slightly. I'm beginning to see I might have been wrong. After he left, I sat amid my scattered art supplies and application materials, feeling a strange new emotion taking root. Hope. Not just for the scholarship, but for something I'd nearly given up on. The possibility that my parents might eventually see me for who I really was, not who they'd planned for me to be. The day of the interview arrived with perfect autumn weather, clear skies and golden sunlight that streamed through the community center's windows, illuminating the murals to their best advantage. I'd arrived early to make sure everything was perfect, arranging a small gallery of my individual works in the center's main room and preparing the children's art space for the committee's visit. As I adjusted the lighting on the largest mural, a collaborative piece depicting the neighborhood through the eyes of its youngest residents, I heard familiar footsteps behind me. This is really happening, isn't it? I turned to find my father, standing just inside the doorway, surveying the space with curious eyes. He was dressed in his usual impeccable suit, looking decidedly out of place among the well-worn furniture and children's art supplies. Dad, what are you doing here? He stepped further into the room, his gaze drawn to the vibrant mural. I wanted to see it. Before the committee arrives. He gestured vaguely around the space. All of it. Where you spend your Saturdays. I watched as he moved closer to the mural, studying the details. The neighborhood bodega with Mr. Garcia's smiling face in the window. The community garden bursting with improbably colored vegetables. The library where many of the children found refuge after school. Within the scene, dozens of small handprints in rainbow colors formed a border, each signed with a child's name. They all contributed, I explained, moving to stand beside him. Every child got to add something that represented them or their experience of the neighborhood. My father nodded slowly. And this part? He pointed to a section where the mural transitioned from present reality to future possibility. Buildings. Restored. New parks blooming. People gathering in community spaces. That's their vision, I said softly. What they hope their neighborhood could become. Richard was quiet for a long moment. It's remarkable, Sophie. Truly. Before I could respond, the center's front door opened and Eleanor Winters entered, followed by 4 other well-dressed individuals, the scholarship committee. My father squeezed my shoulder briefly, then whispered, "Show them who you are," before stepping back to give me space. The interview unfolded better than I could have hoped. The committee members were engaged and genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about my process, my inspiration, and my goals. Having the children's work surrounding us gave context to my answers in a way that would have been impossible in a sterile interview room. Eleanor, for her part, watched with obvious satisfaction as her colleagues responded to my work and to the environment of the center. At one point, she caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod of approval that sent warmth spreading through my chest. Near the end of the interview, the committee chair, a distinguished older gentleman with kind eyes, asked me a final question. Ms. Bennett, why art? With your background and family connections, many paths are open to you. Why choose one that is notoriously difficult and uncertain? I took a deep breath, aware of my father standing quietly at the back of the room. Because art is how I make sense of the world, I began. It's how I connect with people across differences in experience and background. These children, I gestured, to the handprints on the mural, have taught me more about courage and resilience than I could ever learn in a classroom. I paused, gathering my thoughts. My parents want security for me. They equate success with prestige and financial stability, and I understand why. But I've learned that real success is about impact. These murals won't make me wealthy or famous, but they've already changed lives, including mine. That's the kind of success I want to pursue. The committee members nodded appreciatively, and with that, the formal interview concluded. As they gathered their notes and prepared to leave, Eleanor approached me. "You've made quite an impression. Today, Sophie," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear, "not just on the committee, but on this place." She glanced meaningfully toward my father, who was engaged in conversation with one of the other committee members. "And perhaps beyond." I followed her gaze, surprised to see my father genuinely listening as the committee member explained something about one of the murals. "He's trying," I admitted. "My mother is. Still resistant." 6 months later, I stood on the small stage at the Reed Foundation's annual grant ceremony, still not quite believing how dramatically my life had changed. The audience, a sea of influential faces from across Northern California, watched attentively as Eleanor Winters introduced me as the newest recipient of the Emerging Artists Scholarship. "Sophie Bennett represents exactly what this foundation stands for," Eleanor was saying, her authoritative voice carrying through the ballroom. "Talent, yes, but more importantly, a commitment to using that talent to lift others." Her work with underprivileged youth has transformed not just a community center, but an entire neighborhood's sense of possibility. As she spoke, a slideshow displayed behind us, images of my artwork, the children's murals, and candid shots of our Saturday sessions. The contrast between this moment and the last formal event I'd attended couldn't have been more stark. 6 months ago, I'd been invisible in a server's uniform. Today, I stood center stage as hundreds of the same people watched with admiration. I scanned the audience until I found them, my family, seated at a table near the front. My father watched with what appeared to be genuine pride, something I was still getting used to. Beside him, my mother maintained her perfect posture and social smile, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. And then there was Ethan, looking vaguely uncomfortable in his tuxedo, clearly unsure how to process this new reality where his little sister was receiving recognition he'd never anticipated. As Eleanor handed me the ceremonial scholarship certificate, the audience erupted in applause. I stepped to the microphone, the speech I'd practiced 100 times suddenly evaporating from my mind. Instead, I spoke from the heart. 6 months ago, I was serving drinks at my parents' charity gala. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. A ripple of surprised murmurs moved through the crowd as several guests recognized the reference. I was invisible then, or at least, that was the intention. But sometimes being unseen allows you to see more clearly. I paused, finding my mother's eyes in the audience. Her expression was unreadable. That night taught me something invaluable. That true worth isn't determined by the role others assign to you, but by the impact you choose to make. I gestured to the images of the community center behind me. These children taught me that art isn't just about self-expression, it's about creating spaces where everyone's voice matters, where everyone is visible. As I concluded my brief speech, the applause felt like a physical wave washing over me. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder as we exited the stage, whispering, "Perfectly said." At the reception afterward, I was surrounded by well-wishers, arts patrons, and program directors eager to discuss potential collaborations. I navigated the conversations with growing confidence, still amazed that these influential people were treating me as a peer rather than a child to be patronized. Eventually, I made my way to my family's table. My father stood as I approached, pulling out a chair for me. "You were magnificent," he said, and the simple compliment nearly undid me. "Thank you," I managed, taking the seat beside him. My mother reached across the table to adjust my necklace, a small gold pendant she'd given me that morning. It was the first gift she'd offered since the scholarship announcement, and though she'd presented it with little fanfare, I recognized it as a small olive branch. "Your speech was effective," she said, her version of approval. "Though I wish you hadn't mentioned the server incident. People will talk." "People always talk," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "At least now they're talking about something real." Before she could respond, Ethan lifted his champagne glass. "To Sophie," he said, surprising me. The family rebel who somehow landed on her feet. It wasn't the most gracious toast, but coming from Ethan, it was practically effusive. My father, and after a moment's hesitation, my mother raised their glasses as well. "To Sophie," my father echoed with genuine warmth. As we clinked glasses, I caught sight of Eleanor watching our family moment from across the room, a knowing smile playing at her lips. She raised her own glass slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to her conversation. "Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Bennett," a deep voice interrupted our family moment. "Congratulations on your daughter's achievement." We looked up to find Mayor Holloway standing beside our table, his wife at his side. My parents immediately shifted into their social mode, offering practiced smiles. "Thank you, Mayor," my father replied smoothly. "We're very proud." My mother nodded in agreement, though I noticed she didn't quite meet his eyes. 6 months ago, she would have been thrilled to have the mayor's attention at our table. Now, she seemed almost uncomfortable with the reason for his interest. "Sophie," the mayor continued, turning to me, "my office has been following your work at the Eastside Community Center. The impact has been remarkable. Youth engagement is up, vandalism is down, and the neighborhood association reports a renewed sense of community pride." I blinked in surprise. The mayor of Sacramento was following my art program? "I'd like to discuss expanding your model to other community centers across the city," he continued. "Perhaps you could meet with my community affairs director next week?" Yes, absolutely," I managed. "Excellent." He handed me a business card. "Call my office to set it up. We're very excited about the possibilities." As the mayor and his wife moved on to the next table, I stared at the card my hand stunned. My father wore an expression of surprised approval, while my mother seemed to be recalculating something in her head. Ethan broke the silence with a low whistle. Well, the mayor's office? Maybe there's something to this art thing after all, huh, Mom?" Victoria Bennett's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. I could almost see the conflict playing out behind her carefully composed face, her ingrained belief that art was an impractical pursuit, battling with the undeniable evidence that my chosen path was opening doors even she hadn't anticipated. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I found myself alone at our table. My father was engaged in conversation with a foundation board member. Ethan had disappeared with the daughter of a tech executive, and my mother was making her obligatory social rounds. I was gathering my things when Eleanor approached, taking the seat beside me. "How does it feel?" she asked simply. I considered the question. "Surreal," I admitted. 6 months ago, no one in this room knew who I was, or cared. Eleanor smiled. "I knew who you were the moment I saw your work with those children. Talent isn't rare, Sophie. Plenty of people can paint or draw. But the ability to use that talent to transform lives, that's exceptional." I glanced across the room where My mother was now speaking with the director of the State Arts Council, her expression attentive but reserved. Not everyone sees it that way. Following my gaze, Eleanor nodded with understanding. Your mother is adjusting to a future she didn't plan. That takes time. She patted my hand. But don't mistake adjustment for acceptance. Those are very different things. Before I could ask what she meant, Eleanor was called away by another board member. Her words lingered with me, though, as my family gathered to leave. In the car, on the way home, an unexpected silence filled the space between us. Usually, after such events, my parents would immediately launch into an analysis of who they'd spoken with, what connections had been made, what opportunities had presented themselves. Tonight, however, the dynamics had shifted. I had been the center of those conversations, the reason for those connections. Finally, my father broke the silence. The director of the McNamara Foundation asked for your contact information. They're launching a new youth arts initiative next year. The McNamaras? My mother's head snapped up. They never partner with unestablished names. Apparently, they're making an exception, my father replied, a hint of pride in his voice. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. I didn't give him my contact info. Why not? Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Because I'm not interested in becoming a brand, I said, or in being anyone's token young artist. The community center work matters to me. If the McNamaras want to support that specifically, great. But I'm not interested in being pulled in 20 different directions just because suddenly people think I'm worth investing in. My mother made a small sound of disbelief. Sophie, the McNamara Foundation has resources that could set you up for life. You don't turn that away on principle. Actually, that's exactly why you turn it away, I countered. Because principles matter. The kids I work with don't need another program that lasts for a year until funding priorities change. They need consistency, commitment. My father studied me in the rearview mirror. You've thought this through. I've had 6 months to think about what matters to me, I replied, about what success actually means. The rest of the drive passed in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable tension of our previous family dynamics. It was more contemplative, as if each of us was reconsidering long-held assumptions. At home, as we entered the foyer, my mother paused at the base of the grand staircase. Sophie, a moment, please. My father and Ethan exchanged glances before tactfully continuing upstairs, leaving us alone in the dimly lit entryway. Victoria Bennett was not a woman who showed vulnerability easily. Throughout my childhood, she had been the uncompromising architect of our family's social standing, the enforcer of expectations, the guardian of the Bennett legacy. Now, however, she seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. I owe you an apology, she said finally, the words clearly difficult for her. For the gala, making you work as a server was excessive. I blinked in surprise. In the months since that night, my mother had never acknowledged that her punishment had been anything but appropriate. Why now? I asked. She sighed, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her evening gown. Tonight, watching you on that stage, hearing how people spoke about your work, it made me realize I've been holding on to a vision of your future that might not be the right one. I remained silent, afraid that any response might break this rare moment of reflection. I still don't fully understand this path you've chosen, she continued. I worry about stability, about security. Those aren't trivial concerns, Sophie. I know they're not, I conceded. But they're not the only things that matter. My mother nodded slowly. Perhaps not. She reached out and adjusted a strand of my hair, a small maternal gesture that caught me off guard. Your father believes in you. Eleanor Winters believes in you. Even the mayor, apparently, believes in you. A faint smile ghosted across her lips. I should probably start catching up. It wasn't a full endorsement. It wasn't even a promise to stop pushing back against my choices. But from Victoria Bennett, it was a seismic shift, an acknowledgement that my vision for my life deserved consideration. "Thank you," I said simply. As she turned to head upstairs, she paused. "The community center, your Saturday program. Would it be appropriate if I came to observe sometime?" I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You want to come to the Eastside Community Center? Is that so surprising?" "Honestly? Yes." She shrugged slightly, an uncharacteristically casual gesture. "I should see this work that's impressed. So many important people. Purely from a networking perspective, of course." I couldn't help but smile at her attempt to frame her interest in familiar terms. "Of course. Networking. This Saturday, 10 a.m. Wear something you don't mind getting paint on." The look of alarm that flashed across her face was priceless. The following Saturday morning, I arrived at the community center earlier than usual, my stomach a knot of nervous anticipation. I'd told no one about my mother's potential visit, partly because I wasn't entirely convinced she'd follow through, and partly because I wanted to preserve the center as a space free from my family's expectations. I was setting up for the day's session, laying out paints, arranging canvases, preparing the demonstration area, when a familiar voice made me freeze. This is quite different from what I imagined. I turned to find my mother standing in the doorway, surveying the room with curious eyes. Gone was the designer wardrobe that typically defined her public appearances. Instead, she wore dark jeans, a simple blouse, and a light cardigan. Concessions to my warning about paint, though still far more elegant than necessary. "You came," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "I said I would." She stepped further into the room, examining the artwork displayed on the walls, pieces created by the children in previous sessions. "These are impressive." I watched as she moved from one painting to the next, studying each with genuine interest. It was strange seeing her in this environment, like two separate parts of my life colliding in unexpected ways. "The kids will start arriving in about 15 minutes, I explained, continuing my preparations. "We're working on a series about home today, what it means, how it feels, what makes a place more than just a building." My mother nodded absently, still absorbed in the displayed artwork. She paused before a particularly vibrant piece, an explosion of color and shapes that somehow coalesced into a street scene filled with energy and life. "Who did this one?" she asked. "Marisol. She's 12. Her family emigrated from El Salvador 2 years ago." "It's extraordinary," my mother murmured. "The perspective, the use of color." Before I could respond, the center's front door burst open and a small whirlwind of energy raced in. Zach, one of my youngest and most enthusiastic students. "Miss Sophie! Miss Sophie! I brought my cousin today. He didn't believe me that we get to paint whatever we want." The 8-year-old skidded to a halt when he noticed my mother. "Who's that?" he stage whispered, with all the subtlety of an air horn. "This is my mother," I replied, watching carefully for her reaction. "She's visiting us today." Zach considered this information, then shrugged with the easy acceptance of childhood. "Does she paint too?" My mother looked momentarily flustered. No, not really." "That's okay," Zach declared magnanimously. "Miss Sophie can teach you. She taught me, and I was really bad at first." To my amazement, my mother smiled, a genuine smile, not the practiced social expression she typically wore. "Perhaps she can." Over the next hour, the center filled with children ranging from 6 to 16, each greeting me with varying degrees of enthusiasm before settling into the creative chaos that defined our Saturday sessions. My mother remained on the periphery, observing with interest but maintaining a careful distance. Until Lily, a quiet 10-year-old who rarely spoke above a whisper, approached her with a paintbrush. "You look sad," Lily said softly. "Painting helps when you're sad." My mother blinked in surprise. I'm not sad, dear. Just watching. Lily shook her head with the solemn certainty of childhood. Your eyes are sad, like my mom's were after my dad left. She pressed the paintbrush into my mother's hand. Blue helps, and yellow. I watched, holding my breath, as my mother hesitated. For a moment, I thought she would make an excuse, retreat to a safer distance from this unexpected emotional perceptiveness. Instead, she allowed Lily to lead her to an empty seat at one of the work tables. What should I paint? I heard her ask. Home, Lily replied simply, echoing the day's theme. What makes you feel safe? Throughout the morning, I divided my attention between guiding the children through their projects and stealing glances at my mother, who had gradually become absorbed in her own painting. Her initial stiffness had given way to a focused concentration. I recognized from my own creative process that state where the outside world falls away and only the canvas matters. Near the end of the session, as the children began cleaning up their stations, I finally made my way to my mother's side. May I asked, gesturing to her canvas. She hesitated, then turned it toward me. The painting was surprising, not a rendering of our stately family home as I might have expected, but a simple beach scene. A small cottage overlooking the ocean, waves breaking against a rocky shore, a solitary figure standing at the water's edge. It's beautiful, I said honestly. I didn't know you could paint like this. My mother stared at the canvas, looking almost surprised herself. Neither did I, she admitted. It's been a very long time. What is this place? A shadow of something, nostalgia, perhaps, or regret, crossed her face. A cottage my family rented each summer when I was a child, before everything became about appearances and expectations. She set down her brush. I haven't thought about it in years. Before I could respond, Lily appeared at my mother's elbow. I told you, she said with quiet satisfaction. Painting helps. My mother smiled at the child, her expression softer than I'd seen in years. Yes, it does. Thank you, Lily. As the children departed one by one, my mother helped me clean the studio space, moving with increasing comfort among the easels and supply cabinets. When the last child had been picked up, we found ourselves alone in the now quiet center. Thank you for coming, I said, still slightly amazed that she had not only shown up, but fully participated. She nodded, studying the room as if seeing it with new eyes. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? Something more. Chaotic. Disorganized. She looked at me directly. Less impactful. These kids don't need chaos, I replied. Most of them have enough of that at home or at school. They need a space where their voices matter, where their perspectives are valued. My mother was quiet for a moment, then said, like you needed. The simple observation caught me off guard. It was perhaps the most perceptive thing she'd ever said about my art, about my choices, about me. Yes, I acknowledged, like I needed. She gestured to the murals lining the walls. These will outlast the grant cycles and the foundation interests. These children will remember this place, these experiences, long after the current arts education trends have passed. She smoothed her cardigan, a familiar gesture of composure. That's not nothing, Sophie. Coming from Victoria Bennett, it was tantamount to a standing ovation. No, I agreed. It's not nothing. As we gathered our things to leave, my mother paused by the door, looking back at her painting still drying on the easel. Would it be all right if I came back next Saturday? There's something unfinished about it. In that moment, I glimpsed a version of my mother I'd never known existed, someone who had once created for the joy of it, before practicality and social expectations had narrowed her path to the one she'd so desperately wanted me to follow. Of course, I said. You're always welcome here. The drive home was quiet but companionable, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we turned onto our street, lined with its stately homes and manicured lawns, my mother broke the silence. "I made a mistake, Sophie." I glanced at her, unsure what specific mistake she was referring to among the many that had strained our relationship. "The night of the gala," she clarified, "making you work as a server. It was meant to teach you humility, to show you what life might be like without the advantages we've provided." "I remember the intention quite clearly," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She sighed. "But that's not what happened, is it? Instead, it put you directly in Eleanor Winter's path. It gave you an opportunity I was trying to prevent." A rueful smile crossed her lips. "The universe has a sense of humor, it seems." As we pulled into our driveway, I was struck by the irony she'd identified. "If you hadn't forced me into that uniform, I might never have met Eleanor, never received the scholarship, never expanded the community program." "A rather expensive lesson in unintended consequences," my mother observed dryly. But as we entered the house together, I realized something had fundamentally shifted between us. Not a complete transformation. Victoria Bennett would always value tradition, stability, and social standing. But for perhaps the first time, she was seeing me as an individual with my own valid path rather than an extension of her carefully constructed legacy. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. The hurt of that night, of being reduced to a servant in my own home, hadn't magically disappeared. But it was a step toward understanding, toward the possibility of a relationship built on mutual respect rather than expectation and rebellion. And for now, that was enough. 4 months after the Reed Foundation ceremony, I stood backstage at Sacramento's Grand Theater, my heart racing as I listened to the murmur of the audience filing in. Tonight was the unveiling of Voices of the City, a collaborative exhibition featuring artwork from my community center students alongside established local artists. What had begun as a modest idea had grown into one of the most anticipated cultural events of the season, with proceeds benefiting arts education across the city's underserved neighborhoods. "Nervous?" Eleanor's voice came from behind me. I turned to find her immaculately dressed as always, though her eyes held a warmth that belied her formal appearance. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if nobody shows up? What if they hate it? What if—" "Sophie," Eleanor interrupted gently. "The event sold out in 48 hours. The mayor is here, 3 city council members, the Arts Commission, and nearly every foundation director in Northern California." She smiled. "Not to mention your family." At the mention of my family, I instinctively glanced toward the VIP section visible through a gap in the curtains. My father sat reviewing the exhibition program, his expression thoughtful. Beside him, my mother was engaged in conversation with the chair of the State Arts Council, a connection that would have once been purely strategic, but now seemed genuinely animated. Even Ethan had shown up, though he was currently more interested in his phone than the upcoming presentation. "I still can't believe they're all here," I murmured. Eleanor followed my gaze. "Your mother has become quite the advocate for community arts programming." I nearly fell out of my chair when she called to volunteer for the Reed Foundation's fundraising committee. I laughed, still amazed by the transformation myself. In the months since her visit to the community center, Victoria Bennett had undergone a subtle but significant evolution. While she hadn't abandoned her fundamental belief in stability and social standing, she'd begun to recognize that those values could coexist with my more unconventional path. 5 minutes to curtain, the stage manager announced, interrupting my thoughts. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder. "You've done something remarkable here, Sophie. Tonight isn't just about art. It's about proving that voices from every corner of this city deserve to be heard." She smiled. "Now go show them what you've created." As I stepped onto the stage minutes later, the bright lights momentarily blinded me. The theater was packed. Row after row of faces turned expectantly toward the podium. I spotted my students and their families seated in a special section, their expressions a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. "Good evening," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 10 months ago, I stood in my parents' home wearing a server's uniform, invisible to the very people who now fill this theater. A ripple of surprised murmurs moved through the audience. This part of my story had become something of a legend in certain circles, though I rarely referenced it publicly. That night changed everything for me, though not in the way anyone expected. I paused, finding my mother's eyes in the crowd. She gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. It taught me that sometimes our greatest opportunities come disguised as our most humbling moments. As I continued my introduction, explaining the exhibition's concept and thanking those who had made it possible, I felt a sense of surreal gratitude wash over me. The path that had led me here had been neither straight nor smooth, but standing on this stage, I couldn't imagine any other destination. "Tonight isn't about me," I concluded. "It's about the 37 young artists whose work you're about to see. Children who have navigated challenges most of us can't imagine and still found the courage to share their visions of a better world. They are the true voices of our city, and tonight, finally, they will be heard." As the curtain rose to reveal the exhibition, a stunning array of paintings, sculptures, and multimedia installations created by my students in collaboration with professional artists, the audience erupted in applause. The children's faces lit up with pride, many of them experiencing public recognition for the first time in their lives. The exhibition was designed as an immersive journey through Sacramento's diverse neighborhoods, each section telling the story of a different community through the eyes of its youngest members. Visitors would walk through physical representations of the city's hidden corners, experiencing the beauty, challenges, and dreams of areas many of them had never ventured into. As people began to explore the exhibition, I made my way through the crowd, answering questions and introducing my students to interested patrons. The energy was electric, conversations buzzing, connections forming, boundaries dissolving between the city's privileged class and those typically excluded from such cultural spaces. Near the exhibition's centerpiece, a massive collaborative mural depicting the city's past, present, and imagined future. I found my father deep in conversation with Marisol, the 12-year-old whose vibrant painting had caught my mother's attention months earlier. "You've captured the river perfectly," he was saying, gesturing to a flowing blue section of the mural. "The way it connects the different neighborhoods, bringing them together." Marisol beamed. "That was the idea, sir. The river belongs to everyone, rich or poor. Nobody can own it." My father nodded thoughtfully. A profound observation. He noticed me approaching and smiled. "Sophie, Marisol has been explaining the symbolism in the mural. Her understanding of urban connectivity is remarkable." The simple praise, delivered with genuine appreciation rather than condescension, made Marisol stand a little taller. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett." "I believe several people were asking about your individual piece in the East Gallery," I told her. "Would you like to go speak with them?" After Marisol hurried off, vibrating with excitement, my father turned to me. "She's extraordinarily talented." "She is," I agreed. And until the community center program, she had nowhere to develop that talent. Her school eliminated arts funding 3 years ago. My father frowned. "That's unconscionable." "That's reality for most of these kids," I replied, "which is why tonight matters so much. It's not just about showcasing their work, it's about changing the conversation around arts access in this city." He studied me for a moment. "You've found your purpose, haven't you? Not just creating art, but creating opportunity through art." The observation caught me off guard with its accuracy. "I suppose I have." "It suits you," he said simply. Then, with uncharacteristic hesitation, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Richard, Sophie, you need to see this." My mother approached, looking slightly flustered, an unusual state for Victoria Bennett, who prided herself on composure in all situations. "What is it?" my father asked. "Channel 7 News is here," she replied. "They're interviewing the children. The reporter is calling this a transformative model for arts education and suggesting it could become a template for programs statewide." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt a surge of emotion. Not long ago, my mother would have considered local news coverage of a community arts program beneath notice. Now, she was practically glowing with excitement. "That's wonderful," I said. "It's more than wonderful," she insisted. "It's validation, Sophie. This program you've built, it matters. To the city, to these children, to the future of arts education." Coming from the woman who had once dismissed my artistic ambitions as an impractical hobby, it was a stunning acknowledgement. As the evening progressed, I found myself pulled in countless directions, speaking with potential donors, introducing students to arts commissioners, guiding visitors through the exhibition. Throughout it all, a sense of disbelief lingered. This was actually happening. The vision I'd nurtured through months of work was unfolding before my eyes, exceeding even my most optimistic expectations. Near the end of the night, as the crowd began to thin, I finally had a moment to breathe. I slipped away to a quiet corner of the gallery, taking in the exhibition from a distance, the vibrant colors, the diverse styles, the raw, emotional honesty of the work. "Quite the triumph," a voice observed. I turned to find Ethan leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets. Unlike our parents, he'd maintained a careful distance throughout the evening, observing rather than participating. "Thanks for coming," I said, genuinely surprised that he'd stayed the entire time. He shrugged. "Wouldn't miss my little sister's big night." His tone was light, but something in his expression suggested deeper thoughts. "You know, I always thought you were setting yourself up for failure with this art thing." "I remember," I replied dryly. "You made your opinion quite clear." Ethan had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Yeah, well, I was wrong." The simple admission stunned me into silence. My brother, who had spent years perfecting the art of condescension, was actually acknowledging a mistake. "Don't look so shocked," he said with a hint of his old sarcasm. "Even Harvard law graduates can occasionally misread a situation." I laughed despite myself. "Apparently." He gestured toward the exhibition. "This is impressive, Sophie. Not just the art, though that's good too, but what you've built, the connections you've made, the impact you're having." He paused. "I might have underestimated you." "You might have," I agreed, but without rancor. His acknowledgement, however belated, felt like the closing of a chapter, the final piece of family recognition I hadn't realized I was still seeking. As we stood there in companionable silence, Mayor Holloway approached, accompanied by a woman I recognized as the state's education secretary. "Sophie, there you are," the mayor said warmly. "Secretary Martinez has a proposition I think you'll want to hear." The secretary stepped forward, offering her hand. "Ms. Bennett, your exhibition is extraordinary. The integration of community voices, the professional quality of the presentation, the educational component. It's exactly the kind of program we've been searching for." "Searching for?" I echoed, confused. "The state has received a significant federal grant to develop arts integration models for public schools," she explained. "We're looking for innovative programs that can be scaled and replicated. Your community center work, particularly this collaborative exhibition model, is precisely what we had in mind." I blinked, struggling to process her words. "You want to use our program as a model?" "We want to fund an expansion," she clarified. 10 community centers across the state, using your curriculum, your exhibition concept, your community engagement approach. With you as the program director, of course. The proposal was so far beyond anything I'd imagined that I could only stare at her in disbelief. It would mean a substantial budget, the mayor added. Staff, resources, a proper office. The city would partner with the state to ensure local support at each location. I don't know what to say, I managed finally. The secretary smiled. You don't need to decide tonight. Review the proposal. Discuss it with your team. She handed me a folder. But I hope you'll consider it seriously. What you've created here deserves to reach more children. After they departed, Ethan let out a low whistle. Program director of a statewide arts initiative. Not bad for someone who was serving drinks at a charity gala less than a year ago. His words brought me back to that night. The humiliation, the anger, the sense of powerlessness. How drastically my life had changed since then, in ways no one could have predicted. Life takes unexpected turns, I murmured. Especially when you're brave enough to chart your own course, a new voice added. I'm Carlos, from the Fresno Center. He swallowed hard. I just wanted to say thank you. Before your program came to our neighborhood, I was getting into trouble a lot. My teachers had pretty much given up on me. And now? I prompted gently. A shy smile transformed his face. Now I'm heading to San Francisco State next fall. Art scholarship. The simple statement hit me with unexpected force. This was why all the bureaucratic battles and endless grant applications were worth it. This was the real measure of success, not the accolades or the program's growing reputation, but the individual lives redirected toward possibility. That's wonderful, Carlos. Congratulations. As he rejoined his group, I felt a presence at my elbow. My father had appeared, looking slightly out of place in his formal business suit amid the more casual crowd of artists and educators. That happens a lot, doesn't it? He observed. Young people thanking you. I shrugged, still not entirely comfortable with being the focus of such gratitude. I just helped create the space. They did the hard work. My father smiled, the expression softening his usually serious demeanor. Your modesty is admirable but misplaced. What you've built here is extraordinary, Sophie. Coming from Richard Bennett, a man who measured success in courtroom victories and billable hours, the praise carried particular weight. Are you enjoying the summit? I asked, changing the subject. It's illuminating, he admitted. Though, I confess some of the artistic terminology is beyond me. I laughed. You're doing better than Ethan. He lasted through my speech and then claimed an emergency client meeting. My father chuckled. Your brother is trying in his way. He did make a substantial donation to the program last month. This was news to me. He did. Anonymously, my father clarified. He didn't want you to know. Said something about maintaining his reputation as the pragmatic sibling. The revelation touched me deeply. Ethan's support, offered quietly and without expectation of recognition, suggested a level of respect I hadn't realized I'd earned from him. Before I could respond, the announcement came for everyone to return to the main hall for the afternoon session. My father squeezed my shoulder gently. I'll see you at dinner, he said. Your mother has reserved a table at Luciano's to celebrate. As the summit concluded and the crowd began to disperse, I found myself drawn to the exhibition area where student artwork from across the state was displayed. Walking slowly through the makeshift gallery, I studied pieces from communities I'd never visited, created by children I'd never met, all part of the program that had grown from that first small class at the East Side Community Center. Quite the legacy you're building. I turned to find Eleanor beside me, her eyes taking in the diverse collection of artwork. It doesn't feel like mine, I admitted. It belongs to them. I gestured to the student pieces surrounding us. Eleanor smiled. The mark of true leadership, creating something that transcends your own involvement. She linked her arm through mine as we continued walking. The National Arts Commission representatives were impressed today. They're serious about using California's model as a template for a federal initiative. The possibility of expanding our program nationwide was both exhilarating and daunting. That would require significant resources, infrastructure, all manageable challenges, Eleanor assured me, especially with the right director at the helm. I stopped walking, turning to face her directly. You mean me? Eleanor, I'm not qualified to lead something of that scale. Eleanor settled into the chair across from me. Have you given any more thought to the National Commission's interest? I hesitated, then decided to be direct. I have, and I'm going to decline. Or, if Eleanor was disappointed, she didn't show it. Instead, she looked curious. May I ask why? Because it's not where I can make the most meaningful contribution, I explained. The national program would require me to become primarily an administrator, removed from the direct work that makes this initiative effective. I pulled out a sketch pad and flipped to a page where I'd been outlining an alternative vision. Instead, I want to focus on developing a comprehensive teacher training curriculum, something that could be integrated into existing education programs nationwide without requiring an entirely new infrastructure. Eleanor studied the outline, her expression thoughtful. Less visible in the short term, but potentially more impactful over time. Exactly. She nodded slowly. You've grown, Sophie. 2 years ago, you might have been seduced by the prestige of a national appointment. 2 years ago, I was still seeking validation, I admitted. Now I understand that meaningful impact and public recognition don't always align. Eleanor smiled, a mixture of pride and something like nostalgia in her expression. When I first met you serving drinks at that gala, I saw potential, but I couldn't have predicted this level of clarity and purpose. The memory of that night, the humiliation, the chance encounter, the unexpected opportunity, seemed both distant and immediate. So much had changed, yet that moment remained the fulcrum upon which my life had pivoted. Have you told your parents about your decision? Eleanor asked. Not specifically, though we discussed it generally last night. I hesitated, then shared the story of my mother's unexpected gift, the beach cottage that represented her own unrealized creative aspirations. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. That's a profound gesture, Sophie. Far more meaningful than conventional approval. I know, I agreed. It feels like the final piece of a puzzle I've been assembling these past 2 years. Understanding my mother, our relationship, the complex legacy of expectations and dreams that shaped us both. Will you use the cottage? I nodded. As a retreat space for our student artists, I think. A place where promising young people from across our centers can go for intensive workshops away from daily pressures. I smiled. My mother might not have imagined that particular use, but I think she'll appreciate the symmetry, her childhood haven becoming a sanctuary for creative development. Eleanor seemed pleased by this idea, a fitting transformation. She glanced at her watch. I should let you get back to work. Dinner next week to discuss your teacher training curriculum in more detail? I'd like that, I agreed. After she left, I turned back to my notes, but found myself drawn to the window instead. From my office, I could see across the plaza to the city's arts district, an area that had been revitalized in part through connections to our community programs. Young people who had once felt excluded from these cultural spaces now moved through them with confidence, their artwork displayed in galleries, their performances featured in local venues. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily, now 12 and one of our program's most dedicated participants. Ms. Bennett, guess what? My school principal wants me to paint a mural in the main hallway. The simple message brought a smile to my face. This was the real measure of our program's success. Not awards or recognition, but moments when young people discovered their own agency through creative expression. I responded with enthusiastic congratulations, then returned to my work with renewed energy. The teacher training curriculum would require months of development, testing, and refinement, but the potential impact made the challenge worthwhile. Later that afternoon, I made my usual Thursday visit to the original Eastside Community Center where everything had begun. Though my responsibilities had expanded dramatically, I had maintained my direct involvement with this first cohort of students, teaching weekly classes, mentoring individual artists, preserving the personal connection that had made the program effective. The center had changed significantly over the past 2 years. Renovated spaces, new equipment, expanded programming. But its heart remained the same, a place where children felt seen, heard, and valued through creative expression. As I entered the main studio, I found Marisol working with a group of younger students, guiding them through a collaborative project with patience and skill. At 14, she had developed into a natural teacher, sharing her gifts with the next generation even as she pursued her own artistic development. "Ms. Bennett," several children called out, rushing to show me their works in progress. For the next 2 hours, I lost myself in the pure joy of teaching, answering questions, offering encouragement, witnessing small breakthroughs and moments of discovery. This was the work that filled me with purpose, that confirmed I had found my true calling despite the circuitous path that had led me here. As the session ended and the children departed, Marisol stayed behind to help me clean up. "I heard you turned down the national job," she said casually, organizing brushes by size. News traveled fast in our tight-knit community. "I did. How do you feel about that?" She considered the question seriously. "Relieved, I think. You're more important here, with us, than in some fancy office in Washington." The simple assessment affirmed my decision in a way that no professional validation could have. "But," she continued thoughtfully, "I also think your teacher training idea is smart. That way, kids everywhere can have programs like ours, even if you're not running them directly." "That's the hope," I agreed, impressed by her strategic thinking. Marisol nodded, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Does this mean you'll still be here? For the long term?" I understood the deeper concern behind her words. These children had experienced too many temporary programs, too many well-intentioned adults who eventually moved on to other priorities. "I'm not going anywhere," I assured her. "This community, this work, it's my foundation. Everything else builds from here." The tension in her shoulders relaxed. "Good, because we need you. Not just for art stuff, but, you know." I did know. Beyond the tangible skills and opportunities our program provided, it offered something more fundamental: consistent presence, unwavering belief in each child's potential, a reliable anchor in often turbulent lives. "I need you all too," I told her honestly. "More than you realize." After Marisol left, I lingered in the quiet studio, reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. From serving drinks at my parents' charity gala to directing a statewide arts initiative, from seeking my family's approval to finding my own definition of success, the transformation had been profound. Yet for all the external changes, the recognition, the expanding program, the professional opportunities, the most significant shift had been internal. I had discovered not just what I was good at, but what truly mattered to me. I had learned to value impact over prestige, authentic connection over social standing, meaningful work over traditional markers of success. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed a small painting propped against the wall near the door, a new addition I hadn't seen before. It showed a young woman in a server's uniform, face indistinct but posture straight and dignified, standing at the edge of a crowded room. In the foreground, barely visible among the crowd, was a silver-haired woman watching the server with interest. A note was attached. Sometimes being invisible is the first step to being truly seen. Thank you for seeing us. Your students. The simple gift, a reminder of how this journey had begun and how far we had all traveled since, moved me deeply. I carefully wrapped the painting to take home, this tangible symbol of transformation, now a cherished treasure. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the community center's front steps. 2 years ago, I had stood in my parents' home wearing a server's uniform, feeling humiliated and powerless. Today, I stood in the heart of a community that had become my own, surrounded by the evidence of lives changed, including mine. The path forward wasn't without challenges. Building a comprehensive teacher training program, maintaining the quality of our existing centers, securing sustainable funding, all would require continued dedication and effort. But for the first time in my life, I faced these challenges with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Sometimes the moments that seem designed to diminish us become the catalyst for our greatest growth. Sometimes being forced into invisibility leads to seeing possibilities others miss. And sometimes the very people who try to limit our dreams become witnesses to their fulfillment in ways none of us could have imagined. My parents had made me work as their maid at a charity gala, intending to teach me humility through humiliation. Instead, they had inadvertently set me on the path to my purpose, a purpose that had not only transformed my life, but now touched thousands of others. It wasn't the future the Bennetts had planned for their daughter. It was infinitely better, authentic, impactful, and entirely my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.